the music of Frederic Chopin. That was his Nocturne in C-sharp minor on the New Classical FM, played by Polish-Canadian pianist Daniel Vnukowski, who has just joined me in studio. It is Holocaust Memorial Day, and in honor of this solemn occasion, we're spending this hour on a little night music, learning the stories of many Jewish musicians whose fates were determined by the horrific circumstances of World War II. And Daniel is here to tell us these stories. He has, in his busy career, made it a particular cause to spotlight many of these artists, some famous, some unknown, whose stories are intertwined with the Holocaust. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So first, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you become immersed in this area?
I moved to Vienna about a year ago, and Vienna was a bizarre place for me to go. I had lived in many capital cities in Europe, and Vienna had something very dark about its history, something troubling, but the paradox is when you walk around Vienna as a tourist, you're absolutely enthralled by these magnificent Baroque cathedrals, gold-gilded ceilings in music halls, what was once the sixth largest city in the world, an imperial capital. And here I am in Vienna and trying to find who I am in this bizarre city, this glorious city that captivates everyone. But yet here I am, a pianist from Canada, from Windsor, Ontario, of all places.
Quite a contrast.
Quite a contrast. And here I am positioned in this still what you can call perhaps a capital city for music, where there's so much music everywhere with top-class artists. And I wanted to find a certain area, a certain niche, something that would allow me to express who I am and what I want to express as an artist.
So, Daniel, this recording of Chopin of yours that we just heard, you wanted specifically to begin this hour. Tell us why.
The Nocturne in C-sharp minor is a very special piece I often perform on encores. I think it was the perfect piece to kind of set the mood. However, it does have a very powerful story attached to it. And a wonderful pianist by the name of Natalia Karp, who was imprisoned in the Płaszczów concentration camp near Krakow, once played this on the birthday of an SS officer by the name of Amon Guth. And she played it so captivating, in such a haunting manner, so wonderfully that he spared her life.
Wow. So tell us how you got involved in exploring these artists and composers.
Yes, it's actually through my wife. She has been living in Vienna for over 11 years, and I met her in Vienna while we were performing the Trout Quintet together. She's a violist, by the way. Mm-hmm. And through my very short year living in Vienna, I managed to meet the director of the Jewish Museum in Vienna, and he introduced me to so many of these composers, and as well as a new research center which opened up next door to where I live, actually, called the Exil Arte Research Center, for uncovering the music by composers who either were victims of the Holocaust or managed to escape.
One of these we're going to hear from now comes from your family's country, Poland. We're going to start there. Tell us a bit about the circumstances there and about this composer.
Yes, Poland is a country very deep to my heart. That's where my ancestors come from. And my grandfather also was imprisoned in a camp and was liberated by the Allied forces through sheer luck and managed to escape to Canada. Also a harrowing story, which he kept silent until the age of 90. And I discovered many Polish composers who have not had any light of day. People like Jozef Koffler, perhaps Wladyslaw Szpilman is one of the most popular ones, thanks to the movie Pianist. However, there were others, such as Karol Rathaus, who I'm now focusing on very much. He was one of the most established German film composers during the interwar period before emigrating to America.
Karol Rathaus wrote the music for the brothers Karamazov, that's correct. Mm-hmm. We're going to hear a track from that soundtrack now. This is The Murder of Dmitri Karamazov. was my guest, pianist Daniel Vnukowski, with music by Karol Rathaus, Murder of Dmitry Karamazov from the film The Brothers Karamazov. Tell us a bit more about this soundtrack.
This soundtrack, that was dark and chilling, wasn't it? Key of F minor.
The darkest.
Very dark. And chromatic, a lot of chromatic harmony. However, what's most fascinating about it is that the movie, the very first version of Brothers Karamazov ever made at the very beginning of the 20th century, it's actually available on YouTube in a black and white version. The movie was made according to the music because the soundtrack was so good and so powerfully written.
That's amazing. It's completely the opposite of what normally happens.
Absolutely.
Music comes last, but in this case it comes first. Daniel is here telling us stories of Jewish composers whose fates were determined by the Holocaust. Our next composer is another Polish composer, Koffler. Tell us about the piece we're going to hear.
Yes, Jozef Koffler was actually the first Polish dodecaphonic composer. And anybody who has studied basic music theory knows that dodecaphonic, 12-tone music comes from the Second Viennese School, founded by Arnold Schoenberg, where you take 12 tones in a pattern and rearrange them throughout the piece. That's it in a nutshell. However, what's most interesting is that the Jozef Koffler Piano Concerto is the first ever dodecaphonic piano concerto. And what you expect out of what anybody has heard of Arnold Schoenberg, and
very thick, very heavy,
very dense orchestration, contrapuntal. The Koffler Piano Concerto, we'll hear the third movement, is actually cheerful, playful, full of humor, and it's based on a typical Polish dance, a lively Krakowiak in 2/4 time.
I find that amazing. A Polish dance through the lens of 12-tone music.
Yes.
It's completely
He was a
cognitively
complete
dissonant
pioneer.
for me. Amazing. But what happened to Koffler?
Koffler unfortunately died in one of the camps, as was a similar fate of many wonderful musicians, like Gideon Klein, who died in Terezin, a Czech composer. They kept performing in the camps when they could. Often they had a Sunday cafe where everybody gathered together and a beat-up old piano just to show the world, so the SSS officers could show the world, look, it isn't so bad in here. You know, people are having a jolly good time. But this is absolutely a decoy, and the struggles that so many of these composers had to go through and the works that they composed in the camps show extreme strong characters and the ability of the Jewish people to survive any circumstance. The music is very powerful.
And so now we are going to hear music by Jozef Koffler. Incidentally, this is the world premiere recording of his Piano Concerto Opus 13 by our guest, Daniel Vnukowski, on his yet-to-be-released CD. This is the third movement. On the New Classical FM, music in honor of Holocaust Memorial Day, that was a piece by Jozef Koffler, a Polish-Jewish composer who was killed in the concentration camps. That was the third movement from his piano concerto, Opus 13, a world premiere recording made by our guest tonight, Daniel Vnukowski. Stay tuned. Daniel is sticking around, and we are going to discover many more of these composers.
If you could leave a big inheritance to just two of the following beneficiaries, which two would you choose? Family, charity, or the tax department? Most people don't know you can choose just two. We can show you how to preserve your hard-earned money for your family or charity and not leave it to the tax department. Call me. I'm Mark Halpern, wealthinsurance.com.
wealthinsurance.com.
The Elmer Eisler Singers and conductor Lydia Adams invite you to celebrate Canada's 150th birthday on Saturday, May 6th at Trinity St. Paul's United Church in Toronto, with guest artist Eleanor McCain showcasing music from her new CD, True North, the Canadian Songbook. Come celebrate Canada in song with the Elmer Eisler Singers on Saturday, May 6th, 7:30 p.m. at Trinity St. Paul's United Church, Toronto. Tickets call 416-217-0537 or elmereislersingers.com.
We're backstage at the TSO, literally behind the scenes, and you're invited to join us.
Just listen to Sunday Night with the TSO. Sunday night at 8, you get TSO Insider Access. All the inside stories and musical glories of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Sunday night with the TSO. Only on the New Classical FM.
Thank you for calling Moneris, Canada's leading payment processor. How can I help you?
It happened. My first sale.
Congratulations.
He said, a dozen cupcakes. I said, sure. Then I asked, debit, credit, tap. He said, tap. Just like that. First sale. I just had to call Moneris. Is that weird?
Happens more than you'd think.
Switch to industry-leading payment solutions with award-winning customer service and get a rebate of up to $500. Visit Moneris.com for details. Moneris. Be payment ready.
Edith Piaf lived a life of intense love, passion, and abandonment. It's all in her music. May 6, 7:30 at the Great Hall on Queen West, Toronto Concert Orchestra presents Piaf Encore with tribute artist Pandora Top. Tickets at the door or at torontoconcertorchestra.com. Let her story touch you. She was passion. She was heartache. She was love. But above all, she was Paris.
Does your pillow give you the right amount of softness and support? Do you have a light, fluffy duvet that breathes with your body? I'm Joanna Goodman, owner of Olive Fine Linens, and all our pillows and duvets are 20% off in April. It's the perfect time to invest in the quality of your sleep. Visit Olive Fine Linens at Yonge Street and Manor Road or shop online at olivefinelinens.com. That's A-U-L-I-T Fine Linens. Made in Canada by people who truly care.
Now, arts and events from the New Classical FM.
The annual Dare Arts Leadership Awards celebrates 6 Dare Arts youth who have turned around their lives and become leaders in their communities. It also honors Stratford Festival Artistic Director Anthony Cimolino for cultivating culture for Canadian youth. Takes place May 4th at the Carlu. For more information, go to darearts.com. The New Classical FM presents the Opera Atelier production of Charpentier's Medea, on stage at the Elgin Theatre through until the 29th. A stunning French Baroque masterpiece about love, betrayal, and revenge. For more information, go to operaatelier.com. To purchase tickets, go to ticketmaster.ca.
Need to know more? Arts and events are online anytime. Visit classicalfm.ca or you can call us at 416-367-5353. Proudly supporting Toronto's arts and events. We're the New Classical FM.
Your antidote for the daily grind. This is Toronto's only all-classical station. The New Classical 96.3 FM.
Daniel Vnukowski with the music of Wladyslaw Szpilman, his mazurka from 1942. In honor of Holocaust Memorial Day, Daniel is here telling us the stories of the many composers whose lives were affected by World War II. Tell us a little bit about Spielman.
Wladyslaw Szpilman is perhaps the most famous name on the list because he was the protagonist of the movie Pianist, the Roman Polanski's great movie. However, this mazurka was not played in the movie, yet it's a masterpiece in its own right because anybody who hears it for the first time says, oh, that sounds like Chopin. And there's a reason Spielman wrote it in the style of Chopin, because in the Warsaw Ghetto, where Wladyslaw Szpilman was entrapped, Chopin was forbidden. It was forbidden to play any music. This was a rule the SS officers gave. Jews were considered the lowest parasites of society, and they were not allowed to play music of any great artist, composer. So Wladyslaw Szpilman cleverly wrote a mazurka in the style of Chopin, so nobody can say he's playing Chopin. And this was a powerful symbol performed every single week in the cafe, the Sunday cafe in the Warsaw Ghetto, where people gathered and expressed their poetry and music making.
So we're going to move now from Poland, where we've been spending a bit of time, to Germany and Austria. The next composer we're going to hear from is Ernst Toch. Tell us about him.
Yes, Ernst Toch was born in Leopoldstadt, very close to Vienna, and he grew up in the strong tradition that was present in Central Europe, especially in Vienna at that time, with so many composers. The Second Viennese School just growing, with Arnold Schoenberg composing his theories. A huge tradition behind him. We're talking about Mahler, Mendelssohn, who came before him, and of course Wagner had already planted his roots in the theatrical operas, and Strauss with his great dense writing. Puccini was already all over opera houses with his melodic sweeping lines. And Ernst Toch composed in his youth, this is from 1923 when he was very, very young, these wonderful 3 piano pieces. He just calls them 3 piano pieces. And this is the third one called the Burlesque, the Juggler. So it's such a charming piece, and it shows you in great contrast to some of the emotional weightiness we experienced with the pieces that we heard before. This is just a charming work. It's full of orchestral timbres. At the end, he even marks play like a xylophone.
Oh.
So it's full of color. It's full of life, and this kind of shows you what the 20s were like in Vienna, the cafe houses, the glorious getting out together, meeting with people.
It sounds like everybody was very much integrated and there wasn't any kind of segregation at that point.
Absolutely. Since the start of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, 1867, where Emperor Franz Joseph established so many rules that allowed Jews to be completely assimilated in society, allowing intermarriage, allowing voting within constitutional rights. Jews became absolutely very much assimilated in German and Austrian society.
So let's take in the sound of this period. Again, this is The Juggler by Ernst Toch. What a fantastic piece of music. The Juggler Burlesque, that was by Ernst Toch, written in 1923 in Austria when everybody was assimilated. There was no segregation. I'm here with Daniel Vnukowski, who performed that piece, and he is telling us the stories of composers whose lives were changed or ended by the Holocaust. So now we're going to move on to composers who did manage to escape.
Yes. Here's where the story becomes very intricate, because so many composers had emigrated at the very edge of when things got very serious. Nobody believed it could really become so serious. Anybody who would have met Adolf Hitler on the street would have said, this is just a typical thug. Nobody would even come up to him to ask him for a cigarette lighter. He was absolutely disgraceful. And he got so much into power that the hate crimes began to grow and grow and grow until Kristallnacht on November 1938. They became absolutely physical due to a absolutely ridiculous encounter where somebody shot an SS officer, and the SS regime, the Nazi regime, retaliated by burning 1,000 synagogues overnight throughout Germany and Austria. And in fact, the approval for the Nazi Party went down after that. People saw that this is absolutely outrageous, what's going on. And that's when a lot of people said, we really have to get out of here as soon as possible. So between 1938 and 1939, composers such as Walter Arlen, whom I got to know personally, who was still alive at the age of 96, went through a harrowing journey of escaping through London and Paris to Los Angeles, where he has lived for over 50 years, where he's worked as a music critic and as a professor at Loyola Marymount College. And his compositions were hidden for very long. He did not feel that he was ready to show them to the world. He was friends with Igor Stravinsky, all these wonderful composers, Darius Milhaud, Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco. He was great friends with all these people, yet he felt inferior to all of them. And this is a product of being a survivor of an absolutely atrocious regime where so much of his family committed suicide, where he lost a family-owned department store. He lost a beautiful villa where the family would vacation near the Austrian-Hungarian border every summer. And these losses were inexplicable in so many ways. And the piece I wanted to bring is very powerful. It's called the Schlummerlied. I find it difficult to contain my tears when I perform it.
This means slumber song.
A slumber song, exactly. And it is embedded with a phrase from the Hatikva, the Israeli national anthem, where the words are, as long as in the heart within a Jewish soul yearns, our hope is not yet lost. That is the very ending of the Schlummerlied.
Let's hear that now. The Schlummerlied by Walter Arlen. Pianist Daniel Vnukowski with the music of Walter Arlen. That was Schlummerlied, or Slumber Song. And Daniel is with me in studio telling us about composers whose lives and fates were determined by the Holocaust, Walter Arlen being one of them, having escaped and emigrated to Los Angeles. What an amazing piece of music, and beautiful touch, by the way.
Thank you.
Beautifully played.
Thank
How does
you.
it feel to get your hands into music like this?
One doesn't feel much when one plays this kind of music, except great sorrow and great pain. And the entire cycle is actually called Arbeit macht frei, the horrific words that were put on top of Auschwitz for everybody who had entered. Work will set you free. And the second movement is actually only for a metronome, where the metronome gets gradually faster and faster, kind of like the heartbeats of people who are about to enter the gas chambers. It's a harrowing story of survival, and what I'd like to really point out is that many of these composers, when they were forced to exile, especially when they came to the United States, they were like aliens on an alien soil. They had no idea what to do with themselves. They were lost. Schoenberg, the greatest example, got a professorship with a very low pay, as was standard for exiled composers. However, what kept these people alive was getting together on weekends in various people's homes. There are the famous stories of Schoenberg playing tennis with George Gershwin, and many of these composers would get together, talk about music, and experience life because they felt like they were not really understood around them. And many of them had a humble existence. A few notable exceptions was Erich Korngold, who had a wonderful career as a film composer. And in fact, his compositions, so much in that tradition, the Viennese tradition of Strauss and Mahler, wrote glorious, wonderful, rich contrapuntal works that paved the way for the next generation of film music composers.
Absolutely. John Williams owes everything to Korngold. We're going to hear from Korngold when we come back, and we're also going to bring the story home to Canada. Stay tuned.
Bill's Classical Jukebox plays music you want to hear by request.
Hi, I'm Bill Anderson. Call me at 416-603-9630 or send your requests on Twitter at Bill's Jukebox.
Hi, Bill. It's Susan from Toronto calling. Could you please play for me the Italian Capriccio from Tchaikovsky? It reminds me of my roots, and it has such a happy, happy tune. Thank you very much.
Bill's Classical Jukebox, weekdays from 10 until 3 on the new Classical FM, the nation's classical station.
Retirement living isn't for everyone, but what if it's perfect for you? At Revera, we're all about real talk, open, honest conversations about retirement living, and more importantly, about you, your loved ones, and how we can help you live life your way. But don't just take our word for it. Drop by your local Revera retirement residence on Sunday, April 30th between 1 and 4 for an afternoon of good music, great food, and open conversation. Visit reveraliving.com to learn more.
At Acura, we believe that if you're going to aspire to something, it should be greatness. That's why we've loaded the 2017 TLX with an available 290 horsepower engine and Acura Watch driver assist safety features. Aspire to the 2017 TLX super handling all-wheel drive and lease from $188 bi-weekly at 1.9% for 48 months, or get a $4,500 cash rebate on other select TLX models. Visit your local GTA Acura dealer or AcuraGTA.ca for details. Acura. Precision, crafted performance.
French singer Nathalie Dessay is a coloratura soprano with a stunning voice. From singing opera in Vienna to chansons en Paris, she thrills audiences everywhere with vocals that are sublime, transcendent, and unforgettable. Accompanied by recital pianist Philippe Cassard, legendary singer Nathalie Dessay performs music by Schubert, Liszt, Fauré, and Bizet. Tuesday, May 2nd, 8 p.m. at Kerner Hall. Order tickets at performance.rcmusic.ca.
Julio at Pollock's Carpet Market loves spring.
Spring
is the season of love.
I love Pollock's carpets, area rugs, and hardwood flooring.
There's no better time than spring to install hardwood floors.
Pollock's makes hardwood easy. Pollock's overhead is low, so Pollock's prices are low.
Doesn't look like much on the outside, doesn't cost too much on the inside.
The biggest deals on Roncesvalles.
Consumer's Choice Award winner.
Pollock's Carpet Market.
It's dazzling, and it's Strictly Ballroom the Musical. Based on the sensational Baz Luhrmann film, Strictly Ballroom the Musical is the must-see theatrical event that will have you dancing in the aisles. Strictly Ballroom the Musical begins Wednesday at the Princess of Wales Theatre. Book now at mervish.com.
You're intrigued by Magic Windows. You're thinking of getting Magic Windows. You'd love to see Magic Windows for yourself. You could visit thousands of happy Magic Windows owners and stand outside and yell as loud as you can for them to come out and let you in. But with Magic Windows, they won't be able to hear you. Instead, examine Magic Windows, test Magic Windows, prove to yourself the miracle of Magic Windows at the Magic Windows Showroom. Roundtree Dairy Road, just west of Weston Road, just south of Highway 7.
The Honda Unlock a Deal event is on now. It's easy to unlock a next-level ride when you can lease a 2017 Civic LX from just $56 weekly at 1.99% and 0 down. Plus, unlock an awesome bonus with a $750 lease and finance incentive on all 2017 Civic sedan and coupe models. Visit your local Honda dealer today before it's over. Includes rate and fees for 60 months, taxes extra OAC. See HondaOntario.com.
On air, online, unequaled. Beautiful music for a crazy world. The new classical 96.3 FM.
On the New Classical FM, we are marking Holocaust Memorial Day, learning about composers whose lives were affected by Nazism and the Holocaust. The one we just heard, Erich Wolfgang Korngold, emigrated to the U.S. just before the Second World War. That was Marietta's Lied from his opera Die Todstadt, from the soundtrack to the film A Late Quartet, which is fitting because actually Korngold became very big in Hollywood and became was really the pioneer of Hollywood film scores. I'm joined tonight by Daniel Vnukowski, who has been taking us through this journey and teaching us all about these amazing artists. And we're going to bring it home to Canada now. Daniel, tell us about a Canadian composer.
Yes, so much is always said of American composers, Ernst Toch and Karol Rathaus, Walter Arlen, Erich Wolfgang Korngold. Yet what about Canada? There's a set of composers who also either transitioned, went through Canada in the case of Ernst Toch. However, there are also those who stayed, such as Oskar Morawetz, a fantastic Czech composer and one of the pioneers of electronic music in Canada as well. He was a professor at University of Toronto for 20 years, as well as at the Royal Conservatory of Music. Wonderful, wonderful works. And the work I've chosen is a small scherzino, a tiny little joke, basically, written in 1947. However, there's very little joke inside. This is written shortly after World War II, and I think it's interesting to see this scherzino performed in the eyes of someone who had witnessed many of his friends died or committed suicide. And you'll hear in the scherzino, which begins light and airy, a little bit like singing in the rain, there's this downward motion towards the bass of the piano. And you can hear that each phrase is just slightly tinged with sadness. In fact, he chooses not a major key or a minor key, as the most popular that we musicians use or write with. He chose the awfully bizarre mode of D. Locrian.
Wow, that's out there. I don't even know how to describe that for our listeners. Well, let's just hear the piece. That was my guest, Daniel Vnukowski, playing the music of Czech-Canadian composer Oskar Morawetz, who emigrated to Canada to escape Nazism. That was his scherzino in the Locrian mode. Great little piece of music, and you're right. I mean, I know of Morawetz, but we don't hear him very much. So we were talking earlier in the show when we were listening to the Ernst Toch, this very joyful piece of music written at a time when everybody seemed to be harmoniously integrated in German and Austrian society. What changed leading up to Nazism?
I believe one of the greatest factors was a certain horror in the minds of common Germans, common Austrians, a question of identity. Many Germans and Austrians simply didn't know what it means to be German anymore. with so much assimilation. And many Germans and Austrians became absolutely paranoid. The economy was going downhill. Jobs were getting more and more difficult to find. And it took a certain demagogue to come in and all of a sudden provide a simple solution to a very complex problem. And I believe that many Jewish musicians of the time, when they were forced to immigrate out of the regime to escape the hatred, their lives were absolutely permanently altered. And the influence that many of these composers, conductors, pianists had on the entire generation of musicians to come is so extraordinary.
Well, here in North America, you mean? Or elsewhere, everywhere elsewhere. But when I think of North America, and I think of, as a string player, the great pedagogues were all emigres. Like it seems like the bulk of the richness of classical music life in North America was really planted then by these people.
Absolutely. They brought an enormous culture with them. What would orchestral life be without George Sell in the Cleveland Orchestra or Sergei Kusevitsky? Or what would film music be like? Would there be a Star Wars theme if it wasn't for Korngold composing King's Row? Or Kurt Weill and his influence on Broadway?
These are all extraordinary names in North American music history, and those are the ones we know. So it's amazing to hear now, tonight, these other composers that many of us have never heard of, some people have never heard of at all, including the world premiere of that Koffler concerto that we had the privilege to hear tonight. You've decided to end this segment with some Bach. Why is that?
Yes, I believe music is such a universal language, and I believe that the lives of so many of these composers were so deeply affected by what had happened that the music they left us with is powerfully moving in so many ways, not only their stories. They had extremely strong characters. They reached bottom often in their lives, not only financially speaking, in trying to make a living, but in their psyche, trying to find out who they are, where they fit in this world. And I believe it's the power of music that helped them restore some kind of order in their own mind, to find a survival tactic to help them get through the pain. And music has such an inherently strong power to provide us with solace when words no longer can. And some of the greatest consolatory music ever written is that by Johann Sebastian Bach. And I've chosen this wonderful transcription to wrap up our ideas, our thoughts for this evening. And it's Sheep May Safely Grace, arranged by Egon Petri, American composer. And I'd like to end with a quote by Maya Angelou. "Prejudice is a burden that confuses the past, threatens the future, and renders the present inaccessible."
Sheep May Safely Graze by Johann Sebastian Bach. That was played by our guest tonight, Daniel Vnukowski, who has been guiding us through on Holocaust Memorial Day, a journey discovering so many composers whose lives were affected by the Holocaust. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. This has been quite a journey.
Indeed it has. You can learn more about Daniel and his work by going to his website, pianistdaniel.com.